All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the State Water Survey. Today's webinar, Septic Systems 101. A couple things up front. This is hosted by the private well class, which is ran out of the State Water Survey here at U of I. And it's funded, sponsored, and supported by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and US EPA. It's funding from US EPA to RCAP, and we're also funded through that same program to support source water protection and private well owners. Okay. Oh, so if you're a professional who gets EHP credit through NEHA or through the state of Illinois, we are a provider of CEs or continuing education. And so we only have done this once in the last 2 years, which was last July. Normally this is in July. It was supposed to be last month. So if you were here last month and we canceled it, it's because I had COVID. So I do want to mention that one of the side effects I've had is an extended cough. And after talking for an hour and a half today, I may mute myself if I start coughing. So just hang on if that happens. If you're looking for credit, you can email us at info@privatewellclass.org, and there's 3 handouts in the handouts tab on your GoToWebinar window that you can download that information as well. All right, I'm going to move on. So this webinar is part of our national program with RCAP, and so it's kind of RCAP is the boots on the ground, if you will. They have staff in every state. Many of them are either water operators, wastewater operators, or private well experts and EHPs. We have one on with us today. And so the material we're going to cover today follows our private well class, but it's, our class is really about private wells, not as much about septic. We do this particular webinar once a year because we understand the importance that septic systems and all the things that go along with that are to protecting your well and water quality of your groundwater. And so we do record these webinars. So last year's is available on our website as well as all the others we've done this year. And I think we have over 80, 85 maybe webinars that we've done over the last 6 or 7 years. And so they're all on our YouTube channel and then under video, our video tab under our webinar screen. And so at the end today, oh, and I forgot to change this slide. Look at that. I'm not at home today, so I don't have to worry about my daughter making noise. But I should have taken that out. I guess last summer I was. So at the end, there will be time for follow-up questions. And so if something I say or Jim says today that leads to a question for you, you can put it in the chat box, the question box. Katie, who's with us today, will I just had something pop up on my screen that's kind of different. I've never had about an invitation. Anyway, I will let that go. Sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna move on. And I can't. Okay, there we go. So I'm a groundwater hydrologist. Sorry for the slow start today. I've got it on a different screen and it's kind of distracting me. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey. We house the state's well logs. We do a lot of work with well owners in Illinois. I've been doing this for over 30 years. We developed a private well class, and then we have a special guest today, Jim Starbird, who's with RCAP Solutions, which is the Northeast RCAP. He was a health department septic inspector for 7 years before joining RCAP, and so he is a licensed sanitarian and will answer most of your questions that we'll put at the end of the webinar today. Because he's certainly been out in the field and done a lot more. And I could talk about the basics, but that's about it. The real questions, that's why Jim is here today. And Katie Buckley is on our team, our private well class team. She's an outreach specialist, and she's fielding your questions today, as I mentioned. And also, she'll be your contact for any certificates or anything like that you need after the webinar. I already mentioned, I think, but just this will be recorded, so it will be available at least to watch after the fact. You can't watch the recording and get any credit for it if you're a professional. but you can certainly still learn a lot from what's going to go on today. So a little bit about RCAP. It's the national office is based in Washington, D.C., but the work that's done, if you will, is through their 6 regional partners, and it's why it's called a partnership. RCAC is the Western RCAP. I'm in Illinois. That's Great Lakes Community Action Partnership. And Jim is with RCAP Solutions, which is in the Northeast. He's actually based in Massachusetts. If the advantage here is we do the online side of things, like the private well class and these webinars. RCAP and its affiliates do all the boots on the ground work. They work directly with well owners. They work with local health districts and county health departments. They put on workshops. We have an assessment tool, which I'll mention, that's kind of like it does to do a vulnerability assessment of a private well. They've done RCAP. The 6 regions have done over 3,000 of those in the last 4 or 5 years. And so that's a one-on-one with a well owner. So if you have a well owner in your area that has a problem with a well, RCAP can help. And you can contact us, or you can contact any of these affiliates, or just go to their webpage. And all of them have a private well page. We also link to it on our page, and so does US EPA on their private well page. They have a link to all the 6 regions there. So the water survey, just most people don't know who we are. And so I like to show this. We were started in 1895 by our state legislature as part of the chemistry department on campus at the U of I, because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks. So the first thing we did for the first, I don't know, till the early 1910s was mostly water sampling and trying to solve cholera and typhoid issues in communities in Illinois. There's a lot of really cool information in our files that goes back to all of that work. I show it sometimes on these. For today, this was on a slide, an old glass plate slide. I just want to read what it says here about this privy. It says, it is believed that any 14-year-old schoolboy of average intelligence and mechanical ingenuity can, by following these plans, build a sanitary privy for his home at an expense for building materials. So this is the state of the science for a home in a rural area back in the day. This is from the early 1910s, I believe, and it's taken out of a book and put on a glass plate to share with folks whenever our scientists went out and gave talks and things like that. This is Urbana's sewage treatment plant. It's a large septic system, and this dates to 1914. That building with the steeple is our Altgeld Hall, which now is in the center of campus, and we had our own energy source, and that's the smokestack you see over there. The town has obviously changed a lot, and so is our sewage treatment, thank goodness. But at one point, there was a direct line right to a small creek, and that's the way things were done. And so there's a lot of really neat stuff in our files that goes back to before 1900, and so it's kind of interesting. So we're going to talk about septic systems today. It's a wastewater treatment system. They're called on-site systems or decentralized systems, and like anything else, they have to be managed and maintained. So they rely on natural degradation by bacteria. It's the bacteria in our body that gets in the septic tank and breaks down all the material that ends up in there, so that it can then infiltrate and go through in a conventional system through a septic field and percolate down into the natural groundwater system through the soil. And it's further broken down there in the soil, and it's rendered harmless in that way, as long as we do things the right way. So what the tank does is it separates the solids. They drop to the bottom or they float on top, and that also gives the bacteria time to build up and do their job by breaking down the waste. And then the water that separates can go out into the septic field. So yeah, that's really, it's a simple system, mechanical system that works really well on its own. Properly taken care of system that doesn't get clogged and doesn't have chemicals and things in it can last for a very long time. Sorry for the poor image here. I meant to change this, but this is a 2-compartment septic tank, and you can see on the left. So the PVC pipe that comes in from the far left goes into the first tank. All the solids drop out. There's some solids that are lighter than water. They float. Then there's a baffle to get to the second tank, and then the cleaner water, or without the solids in it, goes out through the perforated pipe. And as more water comes in, it pushes more water out. Once it gets to the soil, it says soil absorption field here, the leach field, it just goes into the gravel and down into the ground. And it's just like other infiltration of water, basically. When it rains or anything else, it eventually gets down into the water table or moves off site. And so it's, again, a really simple system. Those solids, though, certainly build up. And that's why you have those intakes at the top so that you can open your tank and you can pump it when it needs it. Here's another diagram showing a single tank with a riser. So the sludge is on the bottom, and then it goes out into, there's two kinds of absorption fields shown here. One is a trench design where it's not completely sand or crushed gravel or rock, and the other one's showing where the whole thing was excavated out and filled in with coarser material that will allow percolation and water to move down through it. So it says here there are over 25 million homes that have septic systems or on-site wastewater systems in the U.S. That number is probably low. The EPA just usually we know there's more septic systems than there are private wells, and the EPA had just completed some work this last year to identify private wells in the country, and we now believe there's 23 million private wells in the country. So there's likely over 30 million septic systems. If that's the case, without any information to back that up, there's likely to be more than what we are saying here, and that was the old number, so to speak. And they will fail if you don't pump it, and it clogs up, if you will, so the water can't flow. You'll see the area around your tank or your drain field will have really green grass. It may be soft when you step on it because there's water under the surface, or it may actually form a pool of water or of waste in your yard or somewhere along the line between your where it comes out of the house and goes into your drain field. You will notice a smell, and worst case, it can back up in your house, and that does happen. And so the thing to do is to take care of your tank. And I hear from people all the time, well, I've lived here for 25 years and we've never done anything. And my response is usually just wait, because eventually it's gonna, if you're not pumping your tank, the solids are gonna build up and eventually it's gonna clog up your system. There's no doubt about that. So as far as sizing and design, it's really, it's based on the number of people, and I know Jim will tell you in Massachusetts, it's the number of bedrooms for a house, because homes do sell, so you can't base it on just the number of people, but in theory, the number of people that might live there. The more people, obviously, the bigger tank, or the more frequently you have to pump. I'll show you a diagram in a minute of one example that the National Environmental Services Center provides. And really, it's about public health protection, right? You don't want, we have regulations, a lot of regulations in most states about where your septic system can go, which side of the home it should be on based on flow direction in the ground, all of those things, because the biggest risk is to your well. It's just like, it's no different than a feedlot for livestock. If it's too close to your well, it can, and your well shallow especially, there's more potential for that effluent to move to your well when you start pumping, because you're lowering the pressure of the water near your well, and that makes water flow towards it. And so it's important from the public health side. And then maintenance. Again, many septic system owners don't know what they need to do to take care of their septic system, and hopefully we'll give you some of that information today. As far as sizing and design, all of that matters just based on how often you should pump your tank to remove the solids. Also, the size of the drain field matters, depending on what kind of water use you have. It needs to be properly sized, or it won't be able to handle it. Or if your tank's undersized, you're putting more water through, then it doesn't give bacteria time to do its job. And so it's important to minimize flow into your tank so the bacteria can work on the water that's there, the material that's there longer. Doesn't mean you have to conserve water, but you should avoid things that, you know, are like a constant flow through your septic system. And as far as older systems, I think we might have a question about that today, but in the old days, sometimes they just ran a line straight to a field tile or straight to a stream instead of to a leach field. And so we still see those. You can be canoeing on a small creek somewhere and see some of those pipes sticking out of the side of a bank, which are totally illegal. And that's, there's not a lot of wherewithal with most of our state agencies to enforce things at that level, just because there's not enough staff. And so some of those don't get taken care of. As far as public health goes, again, if you have a straight pipe to a ditch or to the surface somewhere, you know, it's illegal in most states, and I think it's illegal everywhere now through the US EPA. But it's also just really harmful to the environment. Not only could it be a public health issue for a person, but for just ecology and you know, the waste in a stream, all that sort of stuff. Understanding the groundwater flow direction is important to understanding which way things are moving from your leach field. Most of the time, you know, it's a shallow system, very shallow. So most of the time, it's the water table that's also helping move water through the ground in a really shallow system. And most of the time, the water table follows land surface. So if you're in a subdivision that has a high end on one end and a low end that's near towards a stream, most likely flow is from the high end to the low end. And so if you're that house that's up on the hill, everything's flowing downhill from you. But if you're the person that's in the last house before you get to, you know, the stream or whatever, then at least the shallow water table is probably flowing past all your neighbors first towards you. And so then it's really important about what type of well you have. If it's a really shallow or a Duggar bored well that's getting water from the shallow water table, then you're probably more at risk of having contamination in that respect. And so those are all things you need to understand that go along with being not only a septic owner, but also a well owner. Excuse me. So as far as maintenance, again, just like your water system and your well, your septic system has to be maintained. They will eventually fail. I can't give you a good number for that. Jim may have some more thoughts on that when we get to the questions. Sorry. But they can last a long time. We see a lot of times where a septic system is, you know, 60 or 80 years old because they've taken care of it. So, so you need to have them pumped on a schedule based on size. And then you also need to be careful what you put in your septic system. Oh, and I apologize if you can hear that. Somebody's up on our roof. What else can happen today? We had a leak yesterday after a big rainstorm. So anyway, so don't put toxins down the drain. If you think about it, like if, you know, your kid is sick and they've taken amoxicillin, what is that? It kills bacteria. And so if you throw that down your toilet to get rid of it, you're putting things that kill bacteria into your septic tank that is full of bacteria. And so you don't want to put anything in there, paint or whatever, that will disrupt that natural biological breakdown of the material. So things like cat litter, coffee grounds, all of that will eventually clog the system, especially if you're not pumping it as you should. And so there's a bunch of best practices, and I'm going to show you some resources for those things to help you and your system work properly, and it should last a long time. I mentioned that there's a table. This is one from the National Environmental Services Center. It basically says the number of people, and here's if this is the size of your tank, here's how often you need to pump your tank. So if you have 6 people, it's pretty often, especially if you have a smaller tank. One thing up in the wording at the top, these figures assume there's no garbage disposal unit in use. So several people ask about a garbage disposal in their questions that they asked in advance. And the common rule of thumb is you double how often you pump out your tank if you're using a garbage disposal. Those solids like, your potato peels and the ends of your carrots and all that stuff, bacteria won't break those down in a timely manner. They're too, there's too much mass there, if you will. And so they're just not a good thing to have with your septic system, and they'll build up a lot faster. And yeah, just things to know. So on your to-do list should be to maintain the area around your tank and drain field. A lot of questions about driving over the septic field or putting things near it or trees. You really shouldn't have any of those things around your tank or drain field. You need to know where your tank is. There's also always a lot of questions for this webinar about how do I find my septic tank? You're not alone. A lot of people don't know where they're at. Maybe the people you bought the house from didn't know where it was at either. And so, it should only be grass. There should be no concrete asphalt. You shouldn't be driving over it. It compacts the soil. And once you start doing that, it makes it harder for the material and the liquids in the drain field to percolate down through the soil and as they should. So you should also reduce the flow of water into your system. You shouldn't have a sump pump or a whirlpool or even your softener backwash if you can avoid it. Those things just are a lot of water hitting the system at once. And again, it doesn't give the bacteria time to do its job. And so, and it should only be wastewater going into your septic system. No garbage disposals. It dramatically increases the solids. You don't need to use any additives. There's always a lot of questions about that too. And I have that as the first question today. If you're using your tank properly and you're maintaining it properly, you shouldn't need any additives to have your tank work just like it should. And also no man-made stuff, paint or pills. I mentioned that earlier. And you can also inspect your tank regularly to measure solids or have somebody do it. If you don't know where your tank is and you have a septic person come out and they find your tank, have them measure the amount of solids. I think the rule of thumb is around 60% you want to pump it. And so you can have them come out and measure the solids and maybe pump it then, and then have them come back in a year and measure the solids again. And then you'll get an idea of how quickly it's filling up. And you'll know how often, because you may not, and the reason I say that is you may not know how large your tank is without, excavating around it and all that stuff. So if they can't really tell, then that's one good way to learn how often it should be pumped. So one of the best resources out there is provided by US EPA. If you just go to it's epa.gov/septic, they have a lot of material available on septic systems, decentralized and on-site systems. So, and just so you understand the difference, a centralized wastewater system is your community wastewater plant, where everybody's homes goes to a sanitary sewer, which ends up in a plant where they treat the water and then discharge it. So these systems, they may not just be for one home. There's systems called cluster systems that may be for one block, but a lot of times they're for an individual home or they're in a rural area, and those are all considered decentralized or on-site systems. It means they're taken care of locally. They don't have a piping system for the entire community that goes to one place where they treat all of it together. And so there's a lot of different kinds of septic systems or on-site treatment systems, depending on what your situation is. The most common type is a conventional. This picture is a junction box, and then this is the drain field here, and that's kind of the common way. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the pages that are on here on the EPA site, just so you know where all the information is, because this is really a good resource. There's several manuals listed here, and then I'll also talk about a few other resources as well, like NAURA and NESE, National Environmental Services Center. So if you click on down here under septic systems information, it takes you to learn about septic systems. And there's a lot of places you can go from here. If I click on Septic Smart Homeowners, which EPA has a program called Septic Smart, and I probably forgot to show that. But it's Septic Smart Week is in September. I think it's the 18th. I'm going to go back. Yeah, it's the 19th to the 23rd. And there's also on this page, and I forgot to add it in to the slide deck today, they're having a contest, if you're interested in that. It's a photo contest related to on-site decentralized systems. If you're interested in that sort of thing, you can email us, or you can look on their webpage for that too. But if you go to Septic Smart Homeowners, again, there's a lot of information here. How your septic can impact nearby water sources, which is kind of where we're coming at this from. Again, it's about source water protection and protecting your well. And so when you click on that, you get to this septic systems and drinking water. And if you look at this diagram, what it shows is, the wells on the right side of the house and the septic and drain fields on the left side of the house. But if the groundwater flow direction happens to be from left to right, which it's may not know in the aquifer that your well's in, and it's shallow, and this is showing the water table, which your well may be much deeper and not getting this water from the water table. It may be from an aquifer that's further below, and in that case, it's probably protected. But the whole point is understanding what your situation is. If you have an old dug well or a sand point, then knowing the flow direction is really critical if you have a septic system and drain field as well, because you're getting water from the water table, and that's where the effluent from your septic system is going. Further down the page, it talks more about each of the elements that were shown up there and give you a good explanation if you don't understand some of those basics about your septic system. And this provides all that stuff. And then in addition, these technical resources, if you click on that, some folks live in areas where they may have to have a specialized type of system, either because there's the aquifers right at the surface, that could be bedrock or sand. And so a conventional system is going to potentially contaminate an aquifer, or they're discharging waste that's too high in certain things. And so you may have a system that removes nitrogen so that it's basically doing centralized treatment like a wastewater plant does before it's discharged. And so there are a lot of resources here and technical information about those advanced systems. Or I know we had at least one or two questions today from folks who asked, how can I optimize my septic so that I am, putting water out there that's less harmful to the environment? And one option would be one of these more advanced decentralized units. And so when you click on that, states approve different kinds of technologies. And so if you look through this list, as you scroll through, you can find stuff for your state. And every state regulates things differently, just like they do for wells. So it's really important that you look at what is going on in your area, especially if you're putting in a new system. Here's just a couple examples. This is Idaho's page. They have a lot of information specific for Idaho, which is great. And Massachusetts, they have probably some of the most aggressive wastewater rules in the country, and they have a great website that provides a lot of information. I think it's called Title V. I might have that. Yeah, it is. And so you can scroll through their website. I just went down the page, and there's a lot of information if you're in Massachusetts about what you need to do. And I know there's a lot of issues with, perk tests where they have to mount a system or not do just a conventional system because it won't work in certain areas. The soil just is too clay and doesn't provide enough drainage. And so you can start here. I'm just showing a great example. They have quite a nice website is the bottom line. And all the information you need to know, especially someone who's either putting in a new system or new home, there's a lot of useful stuff here to know before you get going. So going back to the EPA page, there's also webcasts that they've done, and this is a long list. If you click on webcasts, I know someone asked about funding. I'll show you two sources. This is one of them, Own Your Own Future, Home Financing from USDA Rural Development. Some of that is for low-income folks only, but there are programs out there to help folks who may have a problem with their septic system or need to actually put in one, which also happens. And so on this page, if you scroll down, all of these are webcasts. If any of them interest you, or they're things that you're interested in learning more about, yeah, they've been doing these for years. So this is maybe a third of all of them that are there. And again, this is the home financing one that they did in 2017. Barry Ramsey was with the USDA. He's retired now, but yeah, it's just good information. And they also provide other funding sources. It varies by state. I think there are a few states that maybe provide some of their resources for improving septic in areas where it's considered a non-point source issue and things like that. So there's a lot you can read there. And there's also a learning module on septic finance. This is part of their environmental clearinghouse. So if you click on this, it takes you to the clearinghouse of environmental finance. We're interested in water here. So if you click on the water one, it takes you to this. Then there's a learning modules menu item at the top. And this is also for communities, for centralized treatment. So it lists everything. It's meant to be a one place for all of this. And then if you look down this page, the SRF is a program for funding for communities. So is WIFIA, but financing septic systems. Yeah, and you can see what's out there. And that was done by SORA, NAURA, and EPA. And this is that page, because I left that in. Yeah, and so there's all the modules. Talk about it's just if you'd rather do things visually, then this is a good place to start. As far as outreach, I mentioned Septic Smart happens every the Septic Smart week is every September. If you're a provider and you want to share information with folks in your county or your district or regionally, there's a lot of resources available through this outreach toolkit and materials you can download. Put links if you have a Twitter account or Facebook where you put information out for the folks that you help or the well owners that you work with. Then you can use some of this information and provide that on social media. And this is just one of the quick tip videos. There's 4 or 5 of these, I think. So yeah, and they're all meant to be clever, short, to the point, related to septic systems. Yeah, and further down the page, there's other things you can download, print out, or order related to septic systems, and that's important. If you're going to participate in Septic Smart Week, yeah, there's just a lot of material available. So I'm just showing that quickly for those of you that might be interested. They do have a guide and a manual that's on their page as part of their resources, and this is just the top of that. And so it goes through a lot of material that's available. And even going back to where I'm coming from, which is protecting your well, this takes you back to their drinking water page or their private well page. And so this page was recently updated. 2 things they've added. One is at the top now it says 23 million wells, and that's a much more reasonable number than what had been there for the last 10 years or so, or 15 years of 10 million. We know it's a lot more than that. And this is probably pretty darn accurate. But on the box on the right, the first link, bulleted link that says private well training, that comes to the private well class on my website or our website. And the bottom one, private well assessments and workshops, that takes you to a page on RCAP's webpage that lists each of the regions and the work they do. And so this is a really good page for anyone with a well. And I know the work that EPA did to estimate the 23 million, they've got all that online in GIS, and you can look at your area down to the census tract or census block. I can't remember which. Probably says on here census block. You can see the number of wells that are estimated to be in each of those. So information is widely available. You just have to go look. And there's also folks you can talk to, your county or local public health department or district, co-op extension, and also licensed septic inspectors or installers in your area. And my advice would be to talk to your local public health agency and ask them who's a good septic installer or inspector that I can reach out to just to ask questions. And they work with those folks regularly. Some may say, I really don't want to show a preference. It's really not fair. But if they have one that they know is really doing a good job and does everything by the book and all those things and would be a good resource, a lot of them will give you a name. And that's what I would recommend doing. So some other resources, I mentioned NESE before, the National Environmental Services Center. They're at West Virginia University. So if you at the top of the page, there's a wastewater tab. Under that is on-site, and under that is septic systems, and that's the page that I'm on here. And so if you scroll down this page, there's a lot of resources available. I highlighted one on septic tank additives because I'm going to talk about it in a minute when we get to the questions. But there's a lot of good resources here. And NESE used to be a much bigger program. They put out a magazine. It was a Small Flows magazine, and they still provide a lot of really good, useful information that are basics that you need to understand for your septic. Also NAURA, the National On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association. Boy, for some reason that's a hard name for me to remember. But if you go on their webpage under their library, you can get to homeowner information. And again, there's a lot of, and they link to some things that are NESE and other sources, but it's all put in one place. And so it's a really good library of information related to septic systems or on-site systems. And there's also this University of Michigan, or Minnesota, excuse me. Boy, hope they didn't hear me say that. It's called H2O and for O&M, operation and maintenance. So this is a thing you can sign up and put in the information about your septic tank if you know it, or get it from your provider. And it talks about all the components. It basically creates an owner's guide for you. And it's a really cool thing. It was built, again, by the University of Minnesota. And it's if you don't have that information, like an owner's guide or owner's manual, you can create one if you have enough information about your septic system. So it's worth trying out. And I know a lot of this is used even by the installers. Will create a manual for the customer using this website. I mentioned RCAP before. I'm going to talk about it again because I want to talk about the assessments they do. So probably 5 or 6 years ago, we worked with a group of private well experts around the country to develop this assessment tool. And it basically, you go to a homeowner or a well owner's home, and you look at the site, you look at the geology, you look at the well characteristics. If you know the things, if there's a well log, if you can look at the geology online, and just the well cap, everything about the well, what's nearby. We run into wells in all kinds of crazy places, in a feedlot, in a basement, under a garage, all those sorts of things. And then you fill this out, work with the well owner, and it goes over everything. If they have treatment, if they've ever sampled, do they have backflow devices, you name it. And in the end, when it's filled out, then it's something that can be given to the well owner along with recommendations on anything that they might need to do differently or that they might need to fix. If you walk up to a home and they've got an old Folgers can over their 6-inch well as their cap, the right advice would be to put on a sanitary well cap because that's probably the source of, if they have a bacteria problem, that's probably why, for instance. But it also has a septic section, which it's short. Recently, we're working with some other partners, and we're actually going to create a separate assessment tool just about the septic system and get into more detail about whether, especially if it's an advanced treatment system and some of those things. But what it asks today is, what kind of is it? When we started this, I didn't realize that you can have a lagoon in some states as your wastewater system for your on-site system. And there's actually a few in Illinois. I know there's one in Tazewell County where a private home in the country has its own lagoon as their on-site wastewater system. So you just never know. But it asks all the basic questions. A lot of times it's like, when was your septic tank last pumped? I don't know, or I never have. That's a chance for the person who's filling this out to explain why it's important to fill out to pump your tank and understand how big it is, and if you have a garbage disposal or any other issues. And so we are creating a more advanced version of the Section 10, if you will. Eventually we'll have that available for professionals to use when working with anyone with a septic system. So the assessment overall, though, it's like a sanitary survey, if you're familiar with those. Those are like a vulnerability assessment for a community water supply, and this is a vulnerability assessment for a private well. It's all voluntary, and it's not shared with anyone. And the advantage is a professional, like I know Jim does a lot of these, or has, who's really got a lot of experience with private wells, can look at a situation at an individual home and understand if they have anything they might need to change or consider, or things they can do differently that might make their water safer or potentially safer, and those sorts of things. It's also a chance to promote best practices, like a lot of folks have never heard of using backflow prevention devices, but they're important, especially if you're mixing in tanks or anything like that. And it's also gets people to talk about their well so that they're more comfortable and they understand who they have locally that they can ask questions for. We have a lot of well owners tell us, well, I can't call my local health department because they might condemn my well. Well, in 99% of the country, they don't have the authority to do that. There are a few local health districts that have given themselves that authority, but like in Illinois, our county health departments can recommend you don't drink water that might have, say arsenic in it, but they can't tell you can't. And so understanding those things are important if you're a well owner. And the same goes, with septic. What the rules are and understanding those, you should rely on local resources as much as you can. So they've done over 3,000 of these assessments. That's 3,000 private well owners around the country who've requested those. Sometimes they're requested by even a state or local health agency that doesn't have the manpower, if you will, or the staff to actually go out and work with every problem well that they encounter. And so sometimes they'll call one of the RCAP regions and ask them if they can go out and work with the well owner. RCAP has done over 50 workshops in the first part of this program, 3 to 4 years ago, on how to use the assessment tool and also how to do outreach. And now we've changed that, and it's an online 4-hour workshop that we put on once or twice a year. And so if you're interested in that, email us. We haven't set up a date for this year. We did 2 last year. They're really well attended, and they're really meant for professionals who work with well owners, because there's a whole outreach section about how to do outreach to well owners since they're so diverse, and also then about how to use this assessment tool and some examples that we've come across of wells that certainly needed someone to look at them. And so that's one way of developing partnerships and supporting state and county efforts. So if you are with a state or a county health organization, you really should know who the RCAP person is in your state, and a private well person for that region, and try to work with them. They can provide a lot of resources. They can come to meetings and give presentations. They can help set up meetings for other experts to come in, all those sorts of things. So I also want to talk a little bit about the private well class. since that's the program here that we manage and is the reason why we're doing this webinar today. It's 10 lessons, self-paced. You sign up on privatewellclass.org. It's all free. And once you sign up, you'll get a lesson emailed to you. It's a PDF once a week for 10 weeks. It comes once a week. You're on your own to read it. And there's a lot of resources behind it. But what it's meant to be is a start to finish. Here's a lot of the basic things you need to understand about your well to be a good steward of your well and protect your aquifer. It's about source water protection as much as your as well as protecting you and your family and your health of your drinking water. So this is the front page. You just click on take our free class or learn by email, and it takes you to a page where you can sign up. We only ask for an email address, your first name, and where you live. And the where you live part is the state. And that's just so that we can show to the folks that fund us that we are reaching people all over the country. And we've had people from at least 11 or 12 different countries who've taken our class and reached out to us. Even a couple that tried to come to one of our conferences a couple years ago from somewhere in Africa. There's a Spanish version of the entire class, and you can get to that from our English page. And even all the figures and everything else in the class lessons, and there's about 15 of the videos we have been converted, and so they're all available if you're in an area where there's a lot of native Spanish speakers who would prefer to take the class that way. For each lesson under resources, there are a bunch of additional resources. Like for lesson 1 is called The Science of Groundwater, and these different documents, they're all clickable and available freely online by others, but they help explain the same concepts that we're trying to provide. And the idea is some of these we actually use to help write the lesson. Others may explain it in other ways that maybe might resonate better with you as a well owner. And so we've done that for all 10 lessons. Or specific things like, under lesson 2, groundwater and well contamination, the first resource there is the Michigan Flowing Well Handbook. It's by far the best resource I've come across that explains flowing wells and how to cap those. Michigan actually requires them to be capped. They passed a law in around 2000, I think, because they were losing 28 million gallons of groundwater a day to free-flowing wells. And that just means the pressure on those aquifers was enough to push water up to land surface. And so when you put a well in, it's like squeezing a juice box. It comes out the straw. And so really useful information if you're in one of those areas. I know we have 2 fairly small geographically extended areas where we have flowing wells. And so it's important if you're working with one of those well owners to understand those things. So we also have done this webinar a couple times on funding financing options for private well owners. And we talk about financing for private wells, but we also talk about abandoning wells, sealing abandoned wells, funding for septic systems. It's we had the gentleman who ran the program at USDA on our webinar when we did this, and so you can find that in our webinar recordings. And again, the date was October 13th, 2020. So we do a webinar every month like this one we're doing today, and some are on specific topics, like today's about septic systems. And then we also we did this twice, and this is the second one on lead. When lead, all that issue became so prevalent in the news and everything else around 2014 or 2015, a lot of well owners don't understand that, what happened in Flint is not because of lead in the water. And the same way with your home, it's not because there's lead in groundwater, rarely. It's because of piping that has lead in it, or solder that has lead in it. And it depends on the chemistry of your water, whether or not, if you have lead pipes or galvanized pipes or lead solder and copper pipes, you can have one of those things and it not leach any lead at all if the water has the right chemistry. But if it's aggressive or corrosive, then it's going to leach lead and other things out of the pipes, and that's when you have a problem. And so this, we had an expert who's done a lot of research on lead in homes with private wells about this issue, and she basically gave most of the webinar for us on the work that she'd completed at Virginia Tech. And yeah, it's a really useful resource. And then we even have a resource page. It's privatewellclass.org/lead, and it gives you information even about filters that remove lead you can put on your tap and your kitchen tap to help reduce the amount of lead you might be getting in your drinking water from your pipes. There's a series of short videos. These are all 4 to 6 minutes long. What is what is a bedrock well? This one is, how does my pressure tank work? This is actually by far the most viewed video we have. And what it tells us is that there are a lot of folks who don't have good water pressure that are on private wells. It's had over 440,000 views or something like that since 2016. And so it's just meant to explain the different types. You don't see very many of the air water tanks anymore. They usually have a bladder. And these days they're going to pressure tanks that are, maybe a gallon just to really for startup. And they use variable speed pumps for the pressure instead. So technology is changing, but if you have a traditional tank, there's information about that. And things like a shared well, there's a lot more people who share a private well than I ever realized around the country. And there's a lot of problems with shared wells because people don't have a legal agreement or any clear, agreement on who shares the costs. What ends up happening is you have 4 or 5 people who may 4 or 5 homes on a well, and a pump fails, and all of a sudden you have to come up with $3,000 or $4,000, and all of a sudden your neighbors aren't so neighborly whenever it comes to if one of them doesn't have the money to chip in, all those sorts of things. So we get a lot of questions about shared wells, and that's what I recommend is that you need to have an agreement, and even I suggest that people start a fund together so that when a pump does fail, having to come up with $500 to $1,000 each to replace it. We started a podcast. It's it's called Tap Talk, the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. We've had 2 seasons, 24 episodes so far. If you're into that sort of thing, these are really, we've tried to bring in folks like Brian Swistock was at Penn State Extension. He ran a wonderful program, and Brian honestly is probably the most intelligent person I've ever met regarding private wells. Unfortunately for all of us, he retired last December, but we were able to talk to him before that happened. And so it's all about well owner education in that presentation. Dr. Wolf is with Boston Children's Hospital, head of pediatrics. Dr. Gibson is with North Carolina State and does a lot of work looking at areas where private wells in environmental justice communities. And Eric Yegi is with the Water Quality Association, which is one of the 3 certifiers of treatment equipment. And they also represent a lot of the treatment manufacturers. So it's a wide range of folks we've had on, both private well related and community water supply related. And so if you're interested in those things, they're pretty interesting talks. It's a good conversation every time. So the goal of our program, really, all of that put together, is to help you as a well owner understand why your well is important, why you should understand how it works, and also how to protect yourself and your family from any risk related to that, including from your septic tank. And so understanding how both of those work is important. There are certainly people who have septic tanks and not a private well, and there are also people who have a well and no septic. They have centralized wastewater treatment. And so it really depends. We see in the Northeast a lot of communities where they have both. And the real risk there is, depending on how deep it is to the aquifer and where the water is being drawn from, when you have that many septic systems in close proximity to that many wells, as you would in a small, a town of 200 homes, that's a lot of wastewater going into the environment in a small area. So we're going to bring Jim on and to answer a lot of the questions. I'm just going to read off the questions. This is the easy webinar for me in that respect. So we certainly got a lot of questions, well over 100 from everyone, and so we'll obviously can't answer all of those, or we'd be here very late in the day. So if you ask a question about your state or the rules in your state, just send us an email. We're not going to answer that on the live webinar today. We can look into it for you, but this is a national audience, and there's a lot of really good questions that we got that will help everyone, so to speak. And so I want to remind you also that if you have a question, put it in the question box or the chat box, and Katie will, we actually share a Google Doc between us, and it's on my other screen, and I'll pull it over so you can all see it when we get done with these other questions. And so, Jim, are you ready?
I am.
All right, thanks. And thanks for joining us today. Jim's a very busy guy. He's in Massachusetts, if I didn't mention that. And yeah, they've got a lot of great programs going on to help well owners in their state. A lot of sampling, other things. So I think the first question is about additives, and we get asked this a ton, and I sometimes get hate mail from people, email, I should say, about how additives help their system. Everything that we've read, it's like I said in this blog post, the short answer is no. It really works best on its own. There may be situations where things might help, but in general, for a average septic system, conventional system, we would, if we were asked, we would say you don't need any additives to have it work properly. And that's if you're doing all the right things. And there is this, I showed earlier when I was talking about Nessie, and I highlighted the additives, septic tank additives document they had listed there. That's this document, and I recommend you take a look at this on Nessie's website. And if you just Google septic tank additives, I'm pretty sure it'll show up, but you can get to it from Nessie's website pretty simply. And if you can't find it, email us. We'll get you a copy. But they did some work, and they looked, and basically there's no real advantage to any of those additives. And because some of them are expensive, they're costing you money and all that stuff. So, so Jim, I bet there were 30 questions that ask how long does a septic tank or septic system last? What's your experience?
Well, the system itself, they average, I've seen them, 30, 50 years. On average, 15 to 20. It's really about how you maintain them. The tank itself, concrete, it's not really about the environment around it and how good the concrete tank itself was. But the field itself is usually averages 15, 20 years. But again, I've seen them last a lot longer.
Okay, and so as far as if you're not using it regularly, so then this person said they're using it infrequently, 85 days a year, which is, yeah, that's still a fair amount. How often should it be pumped?
It's almost a catch-22 on that question, because if you're talking about like a seasonal cottage that you're using during the summer, you're actually putting no flow into it all winter, which gives it no food, no heat, no new water, if you will. So consider it's a biological thing. We want to continuously, keep it warm and feed it, even during the winter. Flushing your toilets, bringing warmth into there. The biological activities warming it up. If it's a seasonal place and it's already in the winter time and you're not adding any of that, I would almost say maybe pump it before you close it out for the year. Even though you aren't putting as much flow into it, but you're also interrupting the biological processes. So yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 because you're not using it frequently. You're really breaking down the biological processes that are breaking down your waste. So you're not putting much flow in, but at the same time, things are not working like they should, if you will, as if it was your primary home and you're using it year-round, if you will.
So if they were using this every weekend, that'd be different?
Yeah, every weekend throughout the whole season, then you probably, would own it's almost like a regular system at that point. Not as much flow, but at least you're getting some food and some heat in there, if you will. But if they're shutting it down for like, a whole winter, 6 months, and then it's like a summer cottage, which around here, it's the most common thing that we see here in New England. You know, people have a summer home, they open up in Memorial Day and they close up, you know, Labor Day, or maybe even Columbus Day, if you will. But you know, and those systems, you know, I'd almost pump it every other year, if you will, just to make sure those solids are breaking down. Because again, those solids aren't getting the biological activity of a year-round septic system that's getting fed biologics and keeping heat year-round, if you will. You're almost starting fresh, basically every time.
Every time, yeah.
Yeah,
So
Memorial Day. Yeah, you're almost starting fresh because everything in it's, you know, pretty much died other than some seeding, if you will.
And you already answered this third question, I guess, but traditional septic fields have a lifespan, and you mentioned 15 to 20 years. Now the tank should last a lot longer than that, right?
Oh yeah, I would say the tank would last longer, but itself and hold. Most of the things I see in the tank that will go is basically where the inlet and the outlet come in the pipe. The either, you know, if it's a hydraulic cement, or sometimes they use rubber gaskets too. I see those seals break before the actual concrete tank itself goes. I've actually done a Title V for someone. Opened up the D box, is completely dry. It's because all the flow coming out of his septic tank, the seal at the bottom had broken. All the water just kept emptying out at the bottom of basically on the outlet of a septic tank, and just never surfaced. And basically nothing was going to the D box and nothing goes to the leach field. So usually the pipe, you know, the seals around the pipes of the inlet outlet will go before the concrete tank itself.
All right. People in my neighborhood plant trees very near their septic fields and seem to have no issues. And I paraphrased several of these because they were really long. But what would you suggest for planting trees near a septic field?
I wouldn't. Ideally, it should be a grass field used for, you know, passive recreation, if you will. The roots of those trees are going to get into the leach field. They could clog it. But at the same time, when I was on vacation down the Virgin Islands, they told me that they planted their fruit trees and citrus trees on their leach field because that's where the water was. So, you know, different places don't get enough water. You know, there might be a way that they actually sustain it. But here in Massachusetts and around here, where, you know, we don't suggest anything but a lawn, if you will be a septic system, unless it's some sort of advanced thing that has venting that allows for like a concrete parking lot. But that's only, you know, with advanced systems, if you will, extra venting and whatnot.
All right. And this also, I paraphrased, and hopefully I did it justice, but why can't I dig out my old drain field and bring in sand and fill to create a new one? So their question really was like, if you're, you know, to dig a basement that deep and just replace all the material, and the point of this, and it's not a mound, but actually just basically replace everything where the drain field was and put in a new one, because alternate location has a bunch of trees that they have left.
Well, it would really depend on why the system failed. If the system failed because your groundwater table was too high, dig it out and put it in there, you still have the same groundwater, so it's just going to prematurely fail. Here in Massachusetts, it's 4 feet to the groundwater table. So say you had a system that was 2 feet and we dug it out because it eventually filled to the groundwater, and then we put a new system in exactly the same place, we're still 2 feet. Now, if it was just an old system, had a biological field that, what do they call it? Biological field that just kind of became impermeable and dug it up, that'd be one thing. If it's allowed under that code here in Massachusetts, again, we're supposed to put our systems into basically natural sand. If not, we have to go up from there and 4 feet from it. So here we can't do it. It's under our code, but I mean, theoretically, if it's allowed under the code and you don't have a problem like groundwater, et cetera, that caused the field to go in the first place, that'd be one thing. But again, usually if it's failed, what did it fail from? It's high groundwater table, and you're just kind of doing the same bad job over again, if you will. Which is the number one reason I see septic systems fail. prematurely is just bad installation. I just worked on my uncle that he's trying to sell his house. We found out that wasn't draining well, did kind of an assessment of the septic system, looked at the sand and gravel that was underneath the field and found out they put in the wrong stuff. The sand has too many fines in it. The fines finally created an unpermeable barrier, and system's junk. Even though it's only him and his wife in the home. There's 6 bedrooms. It's built for 12 people, which is absolutely amazing that we saw it fail, but had nothing to do with anything he did. It was just that the sand underneath the system was put in wrong. The wrong sand was put in, and sooner or later it caught up to the system, and now it has to all be replaced.
Oh, that's too bad. Huh. All right, thank you. So the question, and I looked this up because I wasn't sure, I didn't have any knowledge of this and I wanted to learn more. So I put this here, and certainly I still need your opinion. Could PFAS be a contaminant in private septic system effluent? And so I found a study where they sampled 20 homes for a lot of things, pharmaceuticals, PFAS, sweeteners, all those things that mentions down there on the right side here. And by far, PFAS was the most common thing they found. They found 11 of the 20, at least one PFAS chemical, and in most of them they found several. So, and it's because they're used in everything, right? I mean, they're used in clothes, Teflon, all that stuff. So if you're rinsing food packages or doing laundry with your clothes that have PFAS in them, or even some of the detergents and those things, even personal care products like the things you'd use in the shower or for makeup, there's PFAS everywhere. And so you're definitely putting PFAS in the environment just by living in a home and discharging water. Anything to add to that, Jim?
Yeah, I was gonna say definitely. There's PFAS everywhere. It's becoming a bigger and bigger issue in wastewater. Some horror stories. Basically, centralized wastewater plants, but the sludge itself now contains PFAS. I've heard some horror stories of that being spread on fields in a dairy farm, and then cows again ate the grass. Now the cows have PFAS, the milk has PFAS, the land has PFAS. So basically the farm's out of business basically. So it is big. It's a growing issue. EPA just set some very, very low health advisory standards. Expect actual drinking water standards in December, and also wastewater type stuff as well. It's something that's ever going to be changing, but definitely is, it's like it says, it's everywhere. It's on our clothes, packaging, everything. It's a forever chemical, lasts forever, and little by little, we take it out of it and put it down our drain, and it's going to start showing up in the aquifer, if you will. Even we have a PFAS standard here in Massachusetts, and Mass DEP did a survey of a lot of the private wells in the smaller communities. And they find about 5 to 7% of the private wells have PFAS standards higher than our Massachusetts standard of 20 parts per trillion. Now, the EPA standard is significantly lower than what we have already looked at. So, it's going to be a huge thing, and I think it's going to be more and more coming out about it. And,
there's still so much that's unknown that it's really going to, some of the main ones like PFAS and PFOA, there's, certainly a lot more known about those, but there's hundreds of them. So it's more to be seen. And it's just, I think we'll learn more, like you said, there's a lot more to be learned, and it will be coming out about each of those. So,
there's a recent story here in Massachusetts, Westminster. It was a composting facility, a large scale composting facility that made compost from all sorts of, school lunch programs, supermarkets, all that kind of stuff, composted down. Turned out that the PFAS, that composting facility is contaminated about 200 to 300 private wells around it, and also sold this compost throughout the state and surrounding states. So we're just still trying to get our head around just that one little incident right there. But you can imagine, something as green as, composting has become a big PFAS contamination issue, at least in that town, but probably bigger because people bought this compost and brought it home and spread it in their gardens.
Yeah, that's you just don't know today what to even do because it's it's in the air, it's in everywhere. So
And like I said, you try to be green by composting instead of putting down oil-based fertilizer and end up with PFAS. So,
yeah. All right. And also, we also get asked a lot about, I left this in from the last time too, because is water softener backwash harmful to a septic system? This is from Rhode Island, and they said, they recommend the brine be discharged below the ground surface in a dry well. Some states don't allow those, but they don't recommend putting it in your septic system. That said, there's been a lot of work done with the Water Quality Association and with NAURA, and they actually on NAURA's website under that same, I showed NAURA's homeowner page where there's a lot of resources available. This was on that page, and there's 8 or 10 number bullets here that explain a lot more detail about water softening and how the best way to do that if you're going to. Some folks have no issues, but others certainly do. And so it's kind of it's a tough, some people say it's okay, some people say it isn't okay. And so I don't know that, and this is a guidance for folks to use, and I would refer to this, I think, unless the state has specific rules, and some do. So anything else on softeners, Jim, that you've learned over the years?
Yeah, this is one of those gray areas, if you will. Here in Massachusetts, anything going in any kind of backwash from any kind of treatment system other than an RO point of use isn't allowed, and it's an automatic failure under a Title V inspection program. So, I mean, I would resort to at least the state law or county law, for what's going on. But it is definitely one of those areas I see a lot, doing a lot of private well assessments. One of the definite things to take a look at is where the backwash goes to the treatment system, and at least advise them that if you're looking to sell your property and you need a Title V, might as well just move that now before you call someone in and pay them to come back just to make sure something was moved.
Sure. Yeah. There's a number of states that don't allow it at all. That's for sure. Yeah. Okay, the walls of my concrete septic tank have been slowly crumbling, flaking off at the lift station into the tank. How do I determine when to replace it?
If that's flunking coming in from the inside of it, then I'd probably say soon. Outside, you probably got a little bit of time, but still soon. When they pump it, you can do a visual inspection of the whole thing, if you will. If they pump and clean it pretty good for you, you can kind of look around there everywhere. Another way to do it too is if you don't have any flow to the house. Say you go on a vacation and you have access to your septic tank, and and there's no flow, for a week. Come back and open up the septic tank and check the water level. If it's gone down pretty good, then you got a leak. If it's gone down very, very slightly, it's probably just a little bit of evaporation. That's another good way to look at it like that. But probably the best way to do it is one of those two ways to inspect. And also take a look at, like I said, the seal around the pipe in the septic tank. Those seem to go quicker than the tank itself. You might be losing water through those.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up because I was thinking about this question when you said that. So it could be a very similar situation.
Yeah, and if it is something like that, it's an easy fix, because you just got to dig up that end and put some new hydraulic cement in, and then, done deal.
That's good. Okay, sewage is surfacing around my septic tank. Do I need to replace the whole thing?
If it's around the septic tank itself, there's something going on. It might be what I talked about, the seal itself, or the tank itself has a rupture. But that septic sewage should be coming out at your leach field, not around your septic tank. The septic tank should be tight, and just letting wastewater in and out and keeping the solids in it. So if you got problems around your septic tank itself and it's coming up, there's something going on. Yeah. So I would say bare minimum inspection and or at least a repair, but it looks like, or full replacement, depending on what they see underneath. If it's just the seals or the whole concrete tank itself has a big problem.
Yeah, so it really depends on what the inspection shows, right? I mean, it could be like the example you gave where it's just around the seals it starts leaking.
Exactly, and then the water, basically, to get the set tank, has to rise to that outlet. And if the water's going in underneath that outlet, the water is just going to continually just never go out that outlet pipe, if you will. It's just going to keep going, dripping underneath and underneath.
Right.
So sooner or later, then that fills up, and then, the surface around you, the soil around your septic tank gets too saturated, and it's got nowhere to go but up.
Yeah, and that's when you start seeing it, and yeah. So I thought this was a great question, and I mean, it's a great idea. Whether it's you can do it by law or not is a different story. But can the shower be bypassed to the drain field?
Legally, no. But at the same time, it's not uncommon to see outside showers. You know what I mean? So, especially in like the Cape Cod area here in Massachusetts, when it has an outside shower, which kind of just goes to the ground anyways, a little dry well. But legally, no, all your inside plumbing has to be all tied in, if you will. One of the things too they look for is your laundry system. Even that has to be tied in. A lot of people put that into a dry well.
Okay. It just I get it, yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people do gray water too.
yeah,
And
yeah.
collect that water and then use it for irrigation of their yard or something.
What have you found to be the most common causes of premature failures? And I think you already mentioned this, maybe.
Bad install.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, whether too far in the groundwater or wrong gravel or sand or whatever it might be. Bad workmanship.
Well, that's too bad. That's certainly a problem that can be, fixed or should be prevented. It's preventable, I guess, is the way to say it. So
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of safeguards, but at the same time, you're only as good as the installer and what they're doing from day to day.
yeah. Okay, so these folks live in a 130-year-old house, and they've been there 39 years. So twice in that time, they've had sewage standing in the field west of their house. Neither time they had different people, is the way I interpret. And again, I paraphrased. They hired to find it and detect the septic tank. They couldn't find it. So is it possible we only have a drain field? If so, what should we do about this?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure it's 130-year-old house. I'm sure there is no, probably is no septic tank or drain field. They might even be just a cesspool. Basically just a pipe going into a hole in the ground for all intents and purposes, almost just like a dug well. And sometimes when that fills up, they'll put another pipe in and to another one. So what would you do about it is I would try to find out exactly what you go in there. They could always camera from the inside out, and then they'd be able to find where in the yard it is, if you will, and then dig it up from there. If it's only come to the surface a few times and went away, it might be during very rainy periods, and then you get in a dry spell and you don't see it anymore. But if you're looking for a permanent fix, probably would be to, probably camera from the inside with some sort of camera that it can find how far it goes out and which direction. Then they can dig from there and dig the system up, see what you got, and kind of make a plan from there, from wherever you live and what the rules are from the state you're in.
Sounds good. So what are our options when the soil is so clayey that conventional leach fields don't percolate well?
Usually it's to mound up. So you have a leach field before you get down to that clay. At least some states 2 feet. Here in Mass, it's 4 feet to get to the bad stuff. Or some places that you just you try to put a new system in, you just can't. Tight tanks, unfortunately, which is basically a septic tank with an alarm on it. When it hits 75% filled, an alarm goes off and you call the septic pumper. That's sometimes, you know, it's a last resort, the last kind of thing you want to put in, but that's usually kind of the last resort we do here in Massachusetts when it's just impractical for the lot you have or where it's located.
Wow. Yeah, that's probably pretty frequent.
Yeah, I mean, especially you got especially a lot of waterfront homes. You know, a lot of people that had a seasonal cottage, and now it's a year-round home. You know, that's been added on, 3 different bedrooms added onto it. You know, so you know, issues like that arise all the time.
Huh.
Actually, in Cape Cod, they're actually talking about making everyone in certain towns around actuaries put on advanced treatment systems onto the septic system, denitrification systems. So even if your system's not in failure the next 3 to 5 years, you're gonna have to put a new denitrification system on because there's so much nitrogen problems on the Cape. Because it just got built up so quickly and with septic systems as opposed to centralized wastewater. So it just, and the environment is paying the price as a result.
No doubt. Sorry. What are the common restrictions which do not allow for the placement of a sand mound system?
It's usually common restrictions that make you put in a sand round system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most common thing is not enough groundwater, depth of groundwater here in Massachusetts, or just unsuitable soil. Because usually, you know, you don't have enough naturally occurring stuff, so we have to build it up to get that 4 feet.
And does a 4 feet really work? I mean,
yeah, I mean, 4 feet from the highest groundwater table, we do what's called a depot and perk, and from there, find where the highest groundwater table up in the kind of the morphic features of the soil. From there, it's 4 feet up, and then we base on how big the system is on the perk rate. And down at the Cape, a lot of them are 5 feet, 6 feet. They get that extra treatment because they have such sandy soils down there that the water just goes through so quickly that
sure.
You want to have that extra foot to get more treatment. And it's a sole aquifer down there too, so it's basically one big sandbar left by the glaciers way back when.
Huh. Okay, so should an electric or cable TV line be buried over the top or under a septic field? Yeah, there was a lot more to this about horizontal drilling and all that stuff. They need to run a line across their system.
I would, if you have to do it, I'd definitely run above it. You know, you don't want to go below it. You know, electrical and septic waste, if you ever had a leak, you know, those wouldn't mix too well. If you ultimately have to, I mean, I'd like to, ultimately, if you can get away from not having them go, you know, across each other, that'd be the, you know, more preferable. But if you have to, I'd go above. Now that's all based on whatever the laws are. It's a new one on me. I've never come to that situation actually with any septic systems being put in. I mean, there's electric components to it, but an actual electric line or cable coming through it. No.
Sure. Our septic system was installed in 2004. Do not know its exact location. Never had any maintenance. No apparent problems. What should I do?
2004 is not that long ago. I would go to your county health department or whoever the agency is that would oversee that. See if you can get the plan. Find out where it is. And definitely have it pumped. If it hasn't been pumped since 2004, you're 18 years in. Definitely have its septic system pumped, regardless of how many people are living there at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't, eventually, you know, they're going to have a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the solids sooner or later are going to
get into
carry
their
over.
septic field, then they'll have to replace that as well.
Exactly. So, what it's the field's the big problem. Once
right.
that gets in the air, I mean, a tank, at least you can just dig it up and put another tank in and reconnect the pipes. That field is that's the expensive part right there.
Yeah, yeah. So you don't want that to happen.
No. I mean, distribution box replacements are very common. They kind of, you know, it's just a small little cement box and not too deep, very common for the, dig those up and those have, been crushed somehow or whatever. But,
Right.
It's a simple, easy fix. Once the leach field goes, though, you're starting fresh, engineers, people, perks, plans, the whole nine.
No doubt. Okay. Okay, so we do have questions. I don't know how many. Let me pull those up real quick. I'm gonna drop this out and get rid of that. Slide this over. Jim, can you see that okay?
Yep.
All right. At some point, would you please comment on a crib type septic system?
That is a new term for me. I've never heard of a crib type system.
Yeah, I was hoping.
I will say there's different lingo throughout the country for the same things, but I haven't heard that one before. But it we might have a different name for it around here, if you will.
I will see what I can find. Okay, so can you please address the following items for use in or with septic systems? I mean, I guess the question is, to me, the question is, all of these things end up in septic systems. So is there any best practices there? We already talked about garbage disposals. But as far as bleach for laundry, my understanding is if you're only doing that once or twice a week, it's not enough to, kill your bacteria in your septic tank. But any other thoughts on those things?
Yeah, I would say, it's going to be definitely diluted. I can't imagine you're going to put a ton of bleach in your laundry, just enough to whiten it. Bleach tablets at toilets, it's that's something that, it's a choice, if you will. You're adding more bleach into the system, not exactly needed, if you will. Antibacterial soap, again, it's very small. You're washing it down, you're washing your hands to dilute it. But ideally, though, you want to limit as much as possible. But we still have to use certain things for our life, if you will. And actually, bleach is not as bad as like a quaternary ammonia or something like that. I'd rather you dump a bleach down there, which comes ineffective after it kills what it needs to, if you will. Quaternary ammonia just keeps killing. Bleach doesn't. Bleach kind of peters out after the free chlorine's eaten up. So if you're going to put some sort of antibacterial down there, bleach is probably better than, like I said, a quaternary ammonia, which will just keep killing.
Okay. So I looked up crib septic system, and it says a crib septic system is a survival man version of a septic tank. It's a mini log cabin buried underground to which your household plumbing terminates. There's an image here on, yeah. So there's even YouTube videos for how to do this on your own. So basically you're digging a square, say 6x6 log cabin underground, put a roof on it and run your line into it. And then it's very much like the cesspool you mentioned, I'd say, with some logs around it.
Yeah, the cesspool normally would be fieldstone or sometimes those well tiles, but they're so old. Usually they just look like fieldstone dry. They almost look like fieldstone dug wells. I've been to some houses that they basically have the same structure in the front and the back. Just one water comes in, one water leaves.
Yeah, that's basically what they're showing here is a cheap septic system, and it's by someone who is off the grid in Alaska. So probably wouldn't meet most states' code.
No, definitely not here in Massachusetts. We just add composting toilets for the Appalachian Trail, but that's kind of about it for that kind of stuff here.
Okay, so we're very close to the Gia River. I think this is in Arizona. Our water table is only 8 feet below ground. I'm very concerned leach field will contaminate groundwater and eventually the river. We don't have running water indoors. We have an outdoor composting outhouse. What should I do to avoid contaminating the environment? Hmm.
8 feet below ground, that's a long way. But Arizona too is sandy, but I mean, and it doesn't seem like it's some sort of, outdoor composting. So,
Yeah, I don't.
I don't
I
know,
mean,
8 foot is a good distance, but I don't know about the rest of, you know, the environment there in Arizona.
yeah, we probably need a little more detail. But if for just a single home, when you say very close, the amount. Yeah, I don't think that you would cause noticeable contamination of the river from your one system. But especially if it has to go any distance through the ground. It's not like there's solids getting in there or anything else. It's mixing and being diluted. And when it hits the water table, uh, yeah, I don't think it would be significant contribution to anything. That would be
I
my.
wonder evaporation too. I mean, it's so hot and it's so
Yeah.
dry, and the soil might just take it away, if you will, being so dry.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, how do I discover the size of my tank? So there's one person living there with another part-time resident. I mean, can't a contractor come out and, if you know where the tank is, at least kind of determine the size of the tank for them?
Yeah, definitely. Or they might have their plan again at the county health department or town health department, whatever it might be. They also might, looking at the size of their house, roughly 3 bedrooms, 1,000, 4, 1,500, if you will. So sometimes by bedrooms too, if it's kind of a recent system, but or one of those three options. Your best bet would, if you can get the plan, or county health department has it on record, then you can just kind of look it up for you and be done with it.
Yeah. And then that probably depends on the state as well, what their rules are. Um, what about antibiotics in urine? If someone is taking taking antibiotics, will there be any impact on the bacteria in the septic tank? And not if someone is dumping antibiotics, but after consumption. Oh, that's the medical question. I mean, if the antibiotics are doing their job, they're being used in your body. I think it probably depends on the type of antibiotic it is. I mean, there's a lot to that question. I've never heard of that being an issue, though. I do know, though, that we have PFAS in our bodies. So our waste is certainly providing PFAS into our septic systems as well. But yeah, I don't. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jim? I don't know how to answer that any other way.
Yeah, I mean, it's an up and coming thing. We're hearing more and more about pharmaceuticals and residuals after it's treated and all that. Even if they're not dumping pills down the toilet or something like that. It's chemotherapy too. I've heard about that as being can cause an issue too. I like to think not, but at the same time, it's one of those. If you need to be on antibiotics, you need to be, and the septic system's going to have to take it for a little while if it is causing an issue. Again, we're trying to, give the best practices, but sometimes you gotta, dump something down you don't want to.
Sure. So how do we find out what direction the aquifer is flowing? Well, like I said, the water table, which isn't necessarily the aquifer, usually follows land surface to a large degree. So if unless it's really flat ground, then it's hard to say. But it's probably not flowing very fast either, left to right or whatever. So some states collect that data. They may have information I know in Illinois we have, and it's only 19 stations in the state, but we collect water table measurements really to understand when things start to get dry, how it's affecting groundwater, or at least affecting infiltration into the shallow subsurface, things like that. So you can look and see if your state resource agency or state geological survey may have monitoring wells that have some of that information. Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy thing to figure out unless if it's very if there's a lot of elevation change, then typically it's going to follow the land surface. So as you go downhill, that's the way the direction of water flow. My experience. Any thoughts there, Jim?
Not really more, other than sometimes some local studies done, USGS, or I've seen even towns had studies done, so there might be more information locally, but I think you covered most of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Any information on bioremediation wastewater treatment systems?
I'm probably another term that they're probably meaning something what we do know, but bioremediation, is that more like further treatment, I would say, or a further treatment because there's a problem in the biological area, if you will, kind of like further nitrogen treatment for, like I mentioned down Cape Cod, because of the freshwater ponds are getting all kinds of bacteria, toxic algae outbreaks and having problems with red tides, etc., like that. So that's what I mean. But yeah, we do a lot of that. In Massachusetts, there actually has to be certified by the state, and there's different levels of certification on each of the technologies. But I've seen them work very great. We had to put one in for a system that having nitrate issues in their drinking water well, and I've seen them, actually treat the wastewater to a level that would meet drinking water standards. So they're highly effective if that's what you're mean by bioremediation.
Yeah, bioremediation for the purpose of cleaning wastewater. It's a process of treating wastewater with the help of naturally occurring microorganisms and other aspects of the natural environment.
Yep, that's kind of what we're talking about. Basically, what these systems do is make a perfect home for the bacteria. They add a lot of oxygen in the area. They give them a perfect domain for them to hang out, if you will. And then from there, there's just much more bacteria there that do much more treatment of the water and bring the nitrogen into denitrification, if you will.
Yeah. All right. For people claiming to have never pumped their tank, is there a possibility that the tank is damaged and leaking directly to the groundwater? Higher probability of metal tanks, wastewater may never back up into their home. It's still going to fill up with solids.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Sooner or later, the solids will be there.
Unless it's a big.
It's possible the tank's leaking, and like I said, around the seals might go before the tank. Metal tanks, even higher probability because they rust out quicker than a concrete tank would.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's possibility that it's just leaking on the side of the septic tank and never makes it to the D box of the leach field.
Yeah, but again, eventually the solids are going to take over.
Oh yeah, you'll end up with basically a box of poop.
Yeah, it's going to back up into your home. There's nowhere for it to go. So I think eventually it's got to back up into their home. It depends on the size of the tank and all those things. So yeah. Is there an issue discharging water softener regeneration water into a septic? I think we've covered that actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, so can PFAS chemicals be released from septic systems and potentially endanger nearby wells? I think we've already talked about that too. We're certainly PFAS that's getting into our wastewater treatment systems. So it's, it is ubiquitous. It's whether it's endangering a well, you know, again, when the stuff from your leach field meets the water table, it's being diluted. And so at what level, it'd have to be fairly concentrated. Not that we want any in the environment. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I guess the other's potential, but there's sources of PFAS, I mean, everywhere. And so there's likely, you know, I think it's, yeah. And so, yeah, it's certainly possible. I guess that answers your question. I'm not sure how likely it is, but it would depend on the individual situation. I'm a sanitarian in an area of very clay soils. Since laterals are almost never an option, we install mostly sand filters. I heard someone mention installing a mound system in clay soils. Is a mound better than a sand filter? Can someone explain the difference and potential pros cons of each?
Well, the mound would be what we call Title V sand here, so it would be almost kind of a sand filter. And then if you're talking about a bottomless sand filter, that would be almost like a further treatment here. That would be what kind of like a denitrification type system. It's required in zone 2s or zone 1s, but I think that's what you're talking about, is that kind of sand filter. We call them bottomless sand filters. I think it was
Yeah, I
started
think so too. I think it's just terminology.
Yeah, different terminologies. But
Yeah.
where we bring in, like, we mounded up what's called Title V sand, which is sand that meets the Title V specs.
Yeah, but I mean, because it is a sand system.
Yeah, it's
to give it a room to
different ways
percolate.
about it. Like the bottomless sand filter would be like a further treatment one. It would go through the sand filter and then almost be repacked, picked back up, and then put into a leach field. So it's almost like a sand filter at the leach field or a sand filter before it hits the leach field. It's kind of two different ways.
Okay, yeah, I think, yeah. Is there a requirement as to how far a private septic system needs to be from a community water well? There most definitely is in every state. It may be a different distance, but and it may have different rules, but each state has to meet, every community water supply well has to meet the regs for the state as well as the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so in most states, there's a ton of rules about how close you can be to a community well for a lot of different things. But certainly for a septic system on a private property. And you'd need to look at your own code for that state to determine what that distance is. I don't know what it is in Illinois, to be honest. So.
In Massachusetts, it's based on the pumping rate of the well itself. So the more water you're drawing, the further out your zone 1, your zone 2 is.
Oh, that's a good way to do it.
It's 100 feet from a private well, but it's all zone 1, zone 2. And you're in zone 1, you can't have any septic. Zone 2, you'd have to have a denitrification system type septic.
Okay, if grass is growing much faster and thicker over the drain field, is that a bad sign? And why?
Usually, yes, because it's showing that the wastewater is going up as far as down. It's growing faster and quicker because it's getting moisture and a lot of nitrogen.
A lot of nutrients, yeah.
And if it's darker green than the rest of it, if the rest of your lawn, then most likely the reason is because you're fertilizing it from your toilet.
Yep. Okay, we see many severely corroded concrete septic tanks in my county, well before you would expect, 5 years old or less. Do you think this is primarily a concrete quality issue, or could homeowners be adding things to their tank that is speeding up corrosion? Was the corrosion on the inside or the outside?
And if you're seeing a lot of it, I wouldn't imagine it's the people. I would say it's probably a bigger issue.
Yeah, but
I know here in Massachusetts, there was a ton of homes made with substandard concrete foundations, and they're crumbling now. So different issue, but still some concrete company made the wrong mix, and 20 years down the road, people are paying the price. And this is an issue in Western Mass and Connecticut mostly, and it's thousands of homes, if you will. So, yeah,
Wow.
I mean, one concrete quarry messes up the mix, and you might not know 5 years, but 5 years for a septic tank, and if you're seeing multiple, I'd say it's a bigger issue. Either you might have a very acidic soil where you are, or something wrong on the concrete quarry.
But if it's acidic soil, that's going to be on the outside of the tank. And
Yeah.
now that I think about this, it has to be on the inside or you wouldn't see it. Unless, yeah.
But I see in many, there's something bigger going on.
No, usually, yeah. Okay, so in a scenario with a high water table, could a surface septic tank work out with a sprout for the soak away? The septic is built on concrete on ground level. How would I best deal with a situation where the waste flows to the soak away? Which is a term I've never heard. The matter is not getting submerged in the septic, but floats and ends up in my soak away. Also, how do I deal with the soak away that is soiled in that manner?
I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
To me, it sounds like a surface pipe, and then when it rains, it soaks away, which that's not going to make it around here.
No, yeah, I don't know. Oh my. Yeah, you're using terms that we're not used to seeing. And yeah, why don't you email us and we'll see what we can find out. Because I don't know how to answer that. And I might want you to send us a picture or two. So, because I'm not even sure who to ask. So, but yeah. Okay. Is a teaspoon or less amount of coffee grounds per day enough to harm a septic system? Remnants from a mesh coffee filter?
I wouldn't say so. No.
Probably not.
No. I mean, if you dump your whole, 12 cup remnants down into your food processor, I mean, disposal, yeah. But no, I mean, a little here, a little there. That's what the septic tank's made for, is to collect those solids and break down some of them, and then be there when you pump out the rest, if you will.
But just know you are adding solids to your tank. I mean, it's going to take a long time, a teaspoon at a time. But
yeah,
that's why we mentioned that, though, is some people throw all their grounds. And yeah, so all right. Well, for those of you that stuck around the whole time, thank you. We are actually done a little early. Jim, thanks so much for being on the webinar today and answering the questions. We had some interesting stuff today, which is great. So I always learn something every time we do this. So thank you all for attending. Again, our email address is info@privatewellclass.org. If you're looking for an ELCE or an Illinois LEHP, or if you just need a certificate for another professional reason, let us know. All right. Jim, take care. Thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Take care, everybody.